So let's be real, folks. Would Spider-Man 4 live up to the original Spider-Man trilogy? What's crack-a-lackin', fellow home dogs? It's your old pal Channel Pup. And today we're going to be talking about the unprecedented film mystery that is Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 4. Now, we do have some nuggets of information as to what this film was likely to be through different drafts of the script. However, nothing truly set in stone. Yes, different drafts suggested that John Malkovich would be playing the Vulture as the film's main villain, and would get cameos from Rhino and Mysterio be played by Bruce Campbell, and those two characters would just be as little cameos at a montage of Spider-Man fighting crime at the beginning of the film, because they didn't have any further plans with those characters. The film would also introduce Anne Hathaway as Black Cat. We know that those were the staples of what this film was going to be. One draft of the script suggesting that Black Cat would be the daughter of Vulture, who would go on to become the Vultress and work with him against Spider-Man. There were also rumblings of a possible Kirsten Dunst exit in this film, possibly setting Black Cat up as the new love interest for Peter Parker, although Bryce Dallas Howard was set up as Gwen Stacy to serve a similar purpose in the previous film. So it could be presumed that either death would do Peter Parker and MJ part, or the two would part ways. Spider-Man 4 was by no means intended to be the final film in the series either, with hopes of films going all the way up to Spider-Man 6. Now, as I say, all of these story details are again quite fluid, because Sam Raimi couldn't really settle on a script draft that he'd been given and was not happy with the direction that the film was taking. He wanted to take time out to reevaluate things, but Sony wouldn't let that happen. The two couldn't agree, and The Amazing Spider-Man was released. And the original series of Spider-Man films was cut short to just the trilogy, leaving the adventures of Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man at something of a premature end. But the question I'm here to ask today is there any chance that this was maybe for the best? Let me give a little bit of context to my opinions here. I love Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy. I remember in early 2017, before the release of Spider-Man Homecoming, we'd got a few trailers for that, and I was thinking, really? A tech suit Spider-Man that works with Iron Man? I remember binge-watching Spider-Man 1, 2, and 3 and just thinking, there was no need to ever reboot this. It's not dated. It's still relevant, it's still enjoyable. I really didn't like the Amazing Spider-Man films either. So for the record, I was and still am a huge and very stubborn fan of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy. Those films were formative to me and countless others, the story of the everyman going on to be greater, at his own personal expense, the guy that knew that he had to be steady and give up the thing he wanted the most, his dreams, just to do the right thing. In adulthood, I think we can all relate to that struggle. It's what makes that trilogy of films so timeless and so haunting. You're getting way more than your money's worth when you expect a superhero flick with those films, put it that way. But at the same time, it is kinda easy to forget where we left off with the Spider-Man trilogy. Which brings me to something I've kinda noticed about Spider-Man fans. You're either a little reluctant to let go of the Raimi trilogy because you remember how amazing those first two films were, and like, why would you want to let that go? Or you remember it for that third movie and are quite dismissive of it, and it's like, okay, it's good that we moved on. And trying to think as realistically as possible, I think the truth is it's somewhere in the middle. I was devastated when Spider-Man 4 was cancelled, and it was an ache that kind of went on for a very long period of time. I'd still jump for joy at any kind of news of any kind of Sam Raimi Spider-Man continuation. But here's my kind of hypothesis. Spider-Man 4 would not have worked out. Now hear me out here, guys. This is not to say I am anti-Spider-Man 4. In fact, there's a group of fans called High Mountain Studios who are making their own sort of version of what Spider-Man 4 might have been, and kind of emulating that universe, and I am so excited for that. It looks terrific so far. But with the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy ending where it did, and where we are now, honestly, I can't see us being in a better of position if it continued than what we're in now. And I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me, but that's the subjectivity of opinion right there. Take it or leave it. Don't have a cow, man. I have no doubts that Spider-Man 4 would have offered some unprecedented thrills and spills for a superhero film of its time. Action sequences in Spider-Man films were incredible, and I'm sure we would have got much more of that in 4. And I'm sure that by now I'd still be binge watching those action sequences on YouTube just as I do the other 3 movies. And while I love Sam Raimi era Spider-Man, you've got to take into account what sort of position the franchise, the story, and this character were in at this time. Spider-Man 4 would either be a fun, if unconvincing, continuation to the original trilogy, or it would be an unrelenting, depressing chore to get through. With where we left off with the original trilogy, There is nowhere you could take that in Spider-Man 4 without it being incredibly, incredibly divisive. There is no way you could continue that trilogy of films without a few important aspects getting cheapened along the way. Spider-Man 3 was a dead end, and I'll explain my process here. Spider-Man 3 was a very intense chapter in the relationship of Peter Parker and Mary Jane. And it was probably my least favorite aspect of the film. Like, I wanted it to be that once Peter and Mary Jane were together, they were together, and just other problems outside of that would arise. But you know why that is? It's because I wanted a happy ending for Peter Parker, like we all did. We want things to work out for him, because he always gets put through so much, but then that's the whole point of the character. Part of what makes these characters in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man film so real and relatable is that they are flawed people. It's a lot more noticeable with Mary Jane, it seems. People tend to point out on the regular that she can be a little bit adulterous, unfaithful, and tends to use kind of relationships as ammunition in some regard. Her phony engagement to John Jameson, for example. But I think what it all boils down to is that she's young and indecisive. That doesn't mean she can't be held to account or held responsible for her actions, but we can all see why no relationship with Mary Jane could ever be healthy for Peter Parker. But it does actually go both ways, which is what people tend to forget because we like Peter Parker. We see how much he goes through on a day-to-day basis. Obviously, there's the Spider-Man thing. If he's with her, she is in danger. And he knows that. It does seem as though, although never explicitly stated, that Mary Jane is Peter Parker's very first relationship. A, he's quite geeky and quite shy, and B, he definitely has more of that puppy love sort of girl next door feelings towards MJ. How much do these two characters really actually have in common? And that's not to say you need to have everything in common to be in a relationship, but why does Peter love Mary Jane? Why is she his endgame? And it's clear that he's extremely romantic about it. There's no actual reasons based around who she is and her character. It's just, oh, he loves her. She's the girl next door. When he looks into her eyes, he feels both afraid and safe at the same time. He always imagined her getting married on a hilltop to him. It's quite obvious into adulthood that Peter is more in love with the idea of being with Mary Jane than Mary Jane herself, and that's not a healthy foundation for a relationship. With Spider-Man 2, we see just about every single odd working against these two. And when they get together against all odds, it's a happy ending, right? Spidey swings off into the sunset, everything is gonna be great, it's the one happy ending in the trilogy. Or is it? It's easy to forget, the final shot is not Peter Parker swinging off into the sunset. The final shot is Mary Jane now looking concerned. There's an expression of kind of dread on her face, and it's pretty haunting. Now, you can say I was reading too far into it with Peter's character, but then why is everything I said completely confirmed in the first act of Spider-Man 3 before he gets the black suit? Peter Parker is suddenly living in a dream world, oblivious to all reality. He doesn't treat Mary Jane like she's an actual human being. She's feeling down. Oh, but I'm Spider-Man, I'm having such a great time. She loses her job. Oh, you just gotta get back on the horse. Peter is completely dismissive of every single insecurity she has because his head is in the clouds, because he's finally done it, he's got his happy ending. But it's all very one-sided. And then at the Spider-Man celebration in Central Park, there's the upside-down kiss reprise with Gwen Stacy, right in front of MJ. Now, I understand that the morality of this, like the rest of the morality to Peter Parker and Mary Jane, is shades of grey, it's not black and white. I understand that what happened there was basically a performance, and in the art of performance there are sometimes platonic kisses that mean nothing. And I get that this is kinda what this was, but Peter Parker does nothing to reassure MJ after this, and she's still seen this act happen in front of her eyes with no prior warning. There were also ways the situation could have been avoided. Spider-Man could have insisted it was done through the mask and not on the actual lips. It could have been more just a little peck, you know, it didn't have to be a full-on smooch. Like, you put the performance aspect aside, Peter Parker is still kissing another woman, and it may be Spider-Man doing it, but Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And Peter just doesn't get why Mary Jane is uncomfortable with this, and she asks him a basic question, was it Peter Parker or Spider-Man doing it? And he just freezes up. In those previous two movies, everything has worked against Peter Parker ever being with Mary Jane. Now in the third movie, against all odds, he's with her, and it's quite clear why the odds were against them. It's the reality of the situation. Peter Parker and Mary Jane don't work. It all boiled over and became very clear once the black suit was involved. But it was of course still a two-sided matter, or in this case, three-sided. Another odd working against them was that their best friend Harry Osborn wanted to be with Mary Jane, and neither Peter or Harry were prepared to give up on that dream. In Peter Parker and Mary Jane's pursuit of happiness with one another, many people were hurt in the process. Harry Osborn, John Jameson, and John Jameson did nothing wrong. These two just have too much baggage with one another, and it did cause the two of them to split midway through the movie. Later on in the film, we see Peter Parker upstage MJ and even hit her. Now, you can say all you want that this is from intervention of the symbiote, but in the exact wording of Dr. Connors, the suit amplifies aggression. It does not create it. These are all realities that a fourth film would have to face. At the end of Spider-Man 3, Peter and Mary Jane's reconciliation is left pretty ambiguous. The two dance in each other's arms, but it's not a happy dance, it's a bittersweet one. The reality of everything that's happened in Spider-Man 3, especially the stuff prior to the black suit, would be the challenges that Peter and Mary Jane and their prospective relationship would have to face, if ever there were a Spider-Man 4, and is that something you want? Do you want another film of Peter desperately trying to justify being with Mary Jane? Because you can't just sweep that stuff under the rug. Otherwise, it would have all been just pointless. The three films in the Spider-Man trilogy have made it abundantly clear that Peter Parker and Mary Jane do not work together. All of the warning signs were there, and things played out exactly as the warning signs predicted. The only convincing route that the fourth film could take would be Peter Parker moving on from Mary Jane. Because sometimes to do the right thing, we have to go steady and give up the thing we want the most, even our dreams. It's clear that being married to Mary Jane Watson was a dream for Peter Parker, but the reality of it will never work, or never work convincingly. So a Spider-Man 4 would either have to be a depressing defeat for Peter Parker, which I really don't want. I don't want a fourth movie of that, or it would be uplifting, but completely unconvincing and cheapen everything that's come before it. And heck, even if they were able to pull off Peter Parker moving on from Mary Jane, it then cheapens much of Peter Parker's main goal and hopes and dreams in the previous trilogy. So where can you really go with that, you know? Well, I guess you could have more of a focus on Spider-Man for the film, but then let's look back at the last scene of Spider-Man in Spider-Man 3. What is the final act of Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, not his Peter Parker? His best friend in the world, who's wanted him dead for years, has forgiven him and made things right on his deathbed. As well as that, Peter has finally confronted Uncle Ben's actual killer, come face to face with him, heard him out, and forgiven him. Spider-Man has finally confronted Uncle Ben's killer and forgiven him. Everything that this series of films ever set out to accomplish with these characters that is of any importance has been accomplished. We've had Peter Parker grow from boy to man, learn responsibility, fight the world to hang on to a dream. We've seen the harsh reality of that dream. We've seen the rise and fall of Peter Parker. It's culminated in Spider-Man defeating the actual manifestation of every mistake he's ever made, Venom. It's come at a deadly cost, but the battle within is won. Peter is finally at peace with the one thing he's regretted more than anything else, the death of Uncle Ben. Spider-Man 3 did everything it needed to do. It stayed true to the roots of the characters and accomplished everything that those characters needed to accomplish and learn. Perhaps stayed even too true to them. This film could be a pretty uncomfortable watch at times, but it's not like it wasn't true to itself. The film could be kind of unsatisfying because really it had to be. My one regret is that we didn't end on a better movie. While I do applaud Spider-Man 3 for everything it gets right, there is definitely a noticeable drop in quality from Spider-Man 1 and 2 through to 3. I wish we could have ended on one more film just to get it really right and just be a great film, but realistically, that probably wasn't going to be the case for Spider-Man 4, which is the sad reality of the situation. But at the end of the day, is that not true to those original Spider-Man films? That there's the dream and the reality, and the two are rarely alike. Now, I could be completely wrong. Maybe they would pull a rabbit out of a hat, and Spider-Man 4 would be the best one yet. These were very talented people at the end of the day. But I can only really see one direction to take it after that last story, because really the book is closed there. Start a new one that's very different and distinctive. Introduce other superheroes. The year after Spider-Man 3's release, the Marvel Cinematic Universe would begin with Iron Man. And in a deleted version of the after credits, it's implied that Sam Raimi's Spider-Man does exist within this universe, as Nick Fury knows about him. However, I do think there would be another problem with introducing the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man into an Avengers-like dynamic. I feel like it would be just a bit weird having a Peter Parker that's the same age as Tony Stark, or a similar age to Tony Stark. Not to mention that Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man was not only tall, but he was built. Sure, he looks great when stood on his own, but imagine him side by side with like Captain America and Thor. Imagine Spider-Man being taller than Captain America and more buff. It wouldn't be right, and I think the best way to go having Spider-Man with other superheroes is to really kind of go with the whole he's the young one, he's the young Avenger. Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man was already an adult, so you kind of lose that dynamic. As well as that, part of what made the Raimi trilogy work was the realism of it and Spider-Man being like the only superhero in the world. So Spider-Man 4, there was just a lot to lose. But to be fair, it's not like we've really missed out on the main things that we wanted to see from Spider-Man 4. Vulture was set to be the main villain. He ended up being the main villain of Spider-Man Homecoming, and he was done really well. Rhino was set to make a cameo appearance. Well, he made a cameo appearance at the end of The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Oh, but we never got to see Dr. Connors become the Lizard. Well, we kinda did in The Amazing Spider-Man. Oh, but Bruce Campbell's Mysterio. Well, we got Jake Gyllenhaal's Mysterio. All of the unused ideas of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy have been used in other iterations. I mean, heck, if you also wanted to see the Raimi version of Dr. Connors become the Lizard, he does it in the Spider-Man 3 video game. Speaking of video game appearances, if you wanted to see Rhino and Mysterio get the Raimi treatment, bada bing, bada boom, they're there. So as far as I see it, we've kinda got the best of both worlds. Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man was fantastic, and arguably the best version of the character. But part of appreciating that is understanding that he did have a sell-by date. Too many films of this guy would either cheapen the appeal of the character, or it would just get unrelentingly painful to watch. And we definitely had our early warning signs of that with Spider-Man 3. What we have with Tom Holland's Spider-Man of the Marvel Cinematic Universe is much breezier and much lighter. He has an abundance of challenges that he has to deal with, but they're much more contained within their respective film. And the lighter nature of these films gives it more longevity. Also, for Spider-Man 4, Sam Raimi was going to put Mysterio in a montage sequence just to show off villains that he had no intentions for. No intentions for Mysterio? Gosh, I'm glad this was rebooted in that case. That's a joke. I'm neither glad nor upset about that. But I think what we have now is the best case scenario. We've got an absolutely iconic trilogy of absolutely spectacular films, and there may have been some bumps in the road, but we've now got a Spider-Man that can stick with us for many more adventures to come. Well, provided that Sony Pictures and Disney can get along. Failing that, gosh, that PS4 game was amazing, and a sequel is inevitable. What do you guys think? Comment below and discuss, and as always, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, why don't you head over to channelpup.net, where we got a blog page called Dr. Blogtopus, but as well as that, you can also buy merch, such as this awful t-shirt. But if you want to be a part of the super fun Kennel Club, why not hit subscribe, hit the like button, and in the description below, you can check out the links to my Patreon and my Twitter. I think that would be pretty sweet for both of us. What do you say, champ? But in all seriousness now, thank you so much for watching, my fellow home dogs. Have a great day, because you and I both know you've earned it. I'll catch you next time. That's a cute outfit. Did your husband give it to you? Because you could get a way better costume from Zentai Zone. Check out their range of custom-made, tailored superhero costumes. Ridiculously good quality, value, and customization. Link is in the description below, as well as my coupon code CHANNELPUP, where you can get a discount off of your purchase. And while you're at it, why not get your suit designed by my talented buddy Dan from New Blood Dan's workshop? You can contact him via the link in the description below. Seriously guys, you do not want to miss out on your chance to be your favorite superhero and feel authentic and professional. And you don't want to miss out on that Channel Pup discount.